Malvern is a spa town and civil parish in Worcestershire, England. At the 2011 census it had a population of 29,626. It includes the historic settlement and commercial centre of Great Malvern on the steep eastern flank of the Malvern Hills, as well as the former independent urban district of Malvern Link. Many of the major suburbs and settlements that comprise the town are separated by large tracts of open common land and fields, and together with smaller civil parishes adjoining the town's boundaries and the hills. The built-up area is often referred to collectively as the Malverns. Archaeological evidence suggests that Bronze Age people had settled in the area around 1000 BC, although it is not known whether these settlements were permanent or temporary. The town itself was founded in the 11th century when Benedictine monks established a priory at the foot of the highest peak of Malvern Hills. During the 19th century, Malvern developed rapidly from a village to a sprawling conurbation owing to its popularity as a hydrotherapy spa based on its spring waters. Immediately following the decline of spa tourism towards the end of the 19th century, the town's focus shifted to education with the establishment of several private boarding schools in former hotels and large villas. A further major expansion was the result of the relocation of the telecommunications research establishment to Malvern in 1942. TRE's successor company remains the town's largest local employer. Malvern is the largest place in the parliamentary constituency of West Worcestershire and a district of Malvern Hills, being also the district's administrative seat. It lies adjacent to the Malvern Hills area of outstanding natural beauty. The populous civil parish has a town council, Malvern Town Council, based in Great Malvern. Toponymy: the name Malvern is derived from the ancient British or Old Welsh Mel Bryn, meaning bare a bald hill, the modern equivalent being the Welsh Malvern. It has been known as Malferna, Malvern, and much Malvern. History: Bronze Age to monastic times. Flint axes, arrowheads, and flakes found in the area are attributed to early Bronze Age settlers, and the Shire Ditch, a late Bronze Age boundary earthwork, possibly dating from around 1000 BC, was constructed along part of the crest of the hills near the site of later settlements. The Y-cutting, a pass through the hills, was in use in prehistoric times as part of the salt route from Droitwich to South Wales. A 19th-century discovery of over 200 metal money bars suggests that the area had been inhabited by the Latine people around 250 BC. Ancient folklore has it that the British chieftain Caractacus made his last stand against the Romans at the British camp, a site of extensive Iron Age earthworks on a summit of the Malvern Hills close to where Malvern was to be later established. The story remains disputed, however, as Roman historian Tacitus implies a site closer to the River Severn. There is therefore no evidence that Roman presence ended the prehistoric settlement at British camp. However, excavations at nearby Midsummer Hill, Fort Bredon Hill, and Croft Ambry all show evidence of violent destruction around the year 48 AD. This may suggest that the British camp was abandoned or destroyed around the same time. A study made by Royal Commission in 2005 that includes aerial photographs of the hills amply demonstrates the archaeological potential of this largely neglected landscape, and provides food for thought for a number of research projects. A pottery industry based on the Malverns left remains dating from the late Bronze Age to the Norman Conquest, shown by methods of archaeological petrology. products were traded as far as South Wales, via the River Severn. The Longdon and other marshes at the foot of Malvern Chase were grazed by cattle. Woodland management was considerable, providing fuel for the kilns. Monastic Malvern. Little is known about in Malvern over the next 1,000 years until it is described as an hermitage, or some kind of religious house, for seculars before the Conquest, endowed by the gift of Edward the Confessor. The additions to William Dugdale's Monasticon include an extract from the pleas taken before the king at York in 1387, stating that there was a congregation of hermits at in Malvern sometime before the Conquest. Although a Malvern priory existed before the Norman Conquest, it is the settlement of nearby Little Malvern, the site of another, smaller priory, that is mentioned in the Domesday Book. A motte and bailey castle built on the top tier of the earthworks of the British camp just before the Norman Conquest was probably founded by the Saxon Earl Harold Godwinson of Hereford. It was destroyed by King Henry II in 1155. The town developed around its 11th century priory, a Benedictine monastery, the remains of which make up some of the early parts of Great Malvern Priory, now a large parish church. Several slightly different histories explained the actual founding of the religious community. Legend tells that the settlement began following the murder of St. Worston, a monk of Deerhurst, who fled from the Danes and took refuge in the woods of Malvern, where the above-mentioned hermitage had been established. St. Worston's oratory is thought to have been located on the site of St. Michael's Chapel, which is believed to have stood on the site of Bellogardo, a Victorian villa. Bellogardo was built on the site of Hermitage Cottage. The cottage was demolished in 1825 and ecclesiastical carvings were found within it. A medieval undercroft, human bones and parts of a coffin were also uncovered. Although the legend may be monastic mythology, historians have however concluded that St. Worston was the original martyr. The first prior was Aldwin, who founded the monastery on his bishop's advice, and by 1135 the monastery included 30 monks. Aldwin was succeeded by Walcher of Malvern, an astronomer and philosopher from Lorraine, whose gravestone inside the priory church records details that the priory arose in 1085 from a hermitage endowed by Edward the Confessor. An ancient stained glass window in the priory church depicts the legend of St. Worston, with details of his vision, the consecration of his chapel, Edward the Confessor granting the charter for the site, and Worston's martyrdom. An 18th-century document states that in the 18th year of William's kingship, a priory was dedicated to St. Mary the Virgin. Victoria County history describes how a hermit Aldwin, who lived in the reign of Edward the Confessor, had petitioned the Earl of Gloucester for the original site in the wood, and cites his source as Gervase of Canterbury, Mapamindi. Large estates in Malvern were part of Crown lands given to Gilbert the Red, the 7th Earl of Gloucester and 6th Earl of Hertford, on his marriage to Joan of Acre, the daughter of Edward I. In 1290. Disputed hunting rights on these led to several armed conflicts with Humphrey de Bohun, 3rd Earl of Hereford, that Edward resolved. Not states that Gilbert made gifts to the priory, and describes his great conflict with Thomas de Cantilupe, Bishop of Hereford. Also about hunting rights and a ditch that Gilbert dug, that was settled by costly litigation. Gilbert had a similar conflict with Godfrey Gifford, Bishop and administrator of Worcester Cathedral. Godfrey, who had granted land to the priory, had jurisdictional disputes about in Malvern Priory, resolved by Robert Bernal, the current Chancellor. A discussion in 2005 about the stained glass windows of the priory church in terms of the relationship between church and laity stresses the importance of Malvern in the development of stained glass. It refers to the vast and strategically important estates of which Malvern was a part in the 15th and 16th centuries, to a widespread awareness of Malvern Priory, to the likelihood of a pilgrimage route through the town. The discussion also mentions Thomas Walsingham's view that in Malvern was a hiding place of the Lollard Knights Sir John Oldcastle in 1414. Chambers wrote, in relation to the stained glass, the situation of Malvern was so much admired by Henry VII, his queen, and the two sons, Prince Arthur and Prince Henry, that they made substantial endowments. The area and the surrounding chase were subject to forest law as a royal forest. In the early period, this would have meant harsh punishments for residents that poached livestock or encroached on other royal entitlements. By Tudor times, royal lands had become used as commons and forest law had fallen into disuse. Post-dissolution. During the dissolution of the monasteries, the local commissioners were instructed to ensure that, where abbey churches were also used for parish worship, they should continue or could be purchased by parishioners. Accordingly, Malvern Priory survived by being acquired by a William Pinnock, and with it much of the 15th century stained glass windows. The monastic buildings were taken apart and anything usable was sold off. With the exception of the church building, all that remains of Malvern's monastery is the abbey gateway that houses today's Malvern Museum. An Elizabethan land grant of 1558 mentions Holywell. A crown grant of tithes in 1589 mentions lambs, pigs, calves, eggs, hemp and flax. Elizabeth made her chancellor Sir Thomas Bromley the lord of the manor. The contemporary antiquary John Leland described the Malvern Hills and Hanley Castle. King Charles I attempted to enclose and sell 2/3 of the chase, as part of a wider attempt to raise revenue for the crown from the sale of royal forests. The attempts to enclose the lands, used as commons, resulted in riots, part of a pattern of disturbances that ran across the disafforested royal lands. In 1633, the Court of Exchequer Chamber of Charles I decreed the rights of the public to 2/3 of the lands on the Malvern Hills, and rights of Sir Cornelius Vermuyden and his descendants, and the Crown, to 1/3. By that time, Malvern had become an established community and the major settlement in the Malvern Chase. Development as a spa. The health-giving properties of Malvern water and the natural beauty of the surroundings led to the development of Malvern as a spa, with resources for invalids and for tourists seeking cures, rest and entertainment. Local legend has it that the curative benefit of the spring water was known in medieval times. The medicinal value and the bottling of Malvern water were mentioned in a poem attributed to the Reverend Edmund Rye, who became vicar of Great Malvern in 1612. Richard Bannister, the pioneering oculist, wrote about the eye well, close to the Holy Well, in a short poem in his Breviary of the Eyes, in 1622. In 1756, John Wall published a 14-page pamphlet on the benefits of Malvern water, that reached a 158-page third edition in 1763. Further praise came from the botanist Benjamin Stillingfleet in 1757, the poet Thomas Warton in 1790, and William Addison, the physician of the Duchess of Kent in 1828, all quoted in a review by the medical historian W. H. McMenemy. In his lecture about in Malvern at the Royal Institution, Addison spoke of its pure and invigorating air, the excellence of its water, and the romantic beauty of its scenery. Similar views appeared in the press. Nicholas Vansittart brought his wife Catherine to Malvern for a rest cure in 1809. Chambers, in his book about in Malvern, praised Elizabeth, Countess Harcourt, whose patronage contributed to the development of hillside walks. Bottling and shipping of the Malvern water grew in volume. In 1842, Dr. James Wilson and Dr. James Manby Gully, leading exponents of hydrotherapy, set up clinics in Malvern. Malvern expanded rapidly as a residential spa. Several large hotels and many of the large villas in Malvern date from its heyday. Many smaller hotels and guest houses were built between about 1842 and 1875. By 1855 there were already 95 hotels and boarding houses, and by 1865, over a quarter of the town's 800 houses were boarding and lodging houses. Most were in Great Malvern, the town centre, while others were in the surrounding settlements of Malvern Wells, Malvern Link, North Malvern and West Malvern. Queen Adelaide visited St. Anne's Well in September 1842. Throughout the 1840s and 1850s, Malvern attracted a stream of celebrated visitors, including royalty. Patients included Charles Darwin, Catherine, wife of Charles Dickens, Thomas Carlyle, Florence Nightingale, Lord Lytton, who was an outspoken advocate of the waters, Lord Tennyson, and Samuel Wilberforce. The hydrotherapists came under heavy criticism from Sir Charles Hastings and other physicians. The extension of the railway from Worcester to Malvern Link was completed on the 25th of May 1859. The following year, besides middle-class visitors, the railway also brought working-class excursionists from the Black Country with dramatic effect. At Whitsuntide, 10,000 came from the Black Country to the newly opened stations at Great Malvern and Malvern Wells. Throughout June to September, day trips were frequent, causing the town to be crowded with the most curious specimens of the British shopkeeper and artisan on an outing. Following Malvern's newfound fame as a spa, an area of natural beauty, and fully exploiting its new rail connections, factories from as far as Manchester were organising day trips for their employees, often attracting as many as 5,000 visitors a day. In 1865, a public meeting of residents denounced the rising rail fares, by then twice that of other lines, that were exploiting the tourism industry, and demanded a limitation to the number of excursion trains. The arrival of the railway also enabled the delivery of coal in large quantities, which accelerated the area's popularity as a winter resort. The 1887 Baedeker includes Malvern in a London-Worcester Hereford itinerary and described as an inland health resort, famous for its bracing air and pleasant situation, and a great educational centre, with 5 hotels that are well spoken of, a commercial hotel, the assembly rooms and gardens, and many excursions on foot, pony and by carriage. Other descriptions of the diversions mention bands, quadrilles, cricket and billiard rooms. The Duchess of Teck stayed, with her daughter Mary, in Malvern in the autumn of 1891, joined by Lady Eva Greville and the Duke of Teck. The Duchess was perfectly enchanted with Malvern and its surroundings, and, with the Duke, visited Malvern College. The Duchess returned to open the new waterworks at Camp Hill in 1895. In 1897, the painter Edward Burne-Jones came to Malvern for the bracing air, on the recommendation of his doctor, but stayed in his hotel for a week. The 7-year-old Franklin D. Roosevelt visited in 1889, during a trip to Europe with his parents. By 1875, encroachment on Malvern's wastelands by landowners had reached new heights and action was taken by the people of Malvern and the Commons Society to preserve the hills and common land and to prevent encroachment. Local lords of the manor indicated that they would like to give the rights to the waste to the public. After preventing the enclosure of a common in 1882, negotiations were initiated with the owners of the Northern Hills, and the first in Malvern Hills Act was secured in Parliament in 1884. Later acts empowered the Malvern Hills conservators to acquire land to prevent further encroachment on common land, and by 1925 they had bought much of the manorial wastelands. Towards the end of the 19th century, the popularity of the hydrotherapy had declined to the extent that many hotels were already being converted into private boarding schools and rest homes, and education became the basis of Malvern's economy. By 1865, the town already had 17 single-gender private schools, increasing to 25 by 1885. The area was well suited for schools due to its established attractive environment and access by rail. Children could travel unaccompanied with their trunks by rail to the boarding schools near the stations in Great Malvern, Malvern Wells, and Malvern Link. The Girls' College, in a former hotel directly opposite Great Malvern railway station, has a dedicated tunnel to the basement of the building, which is clearly visible from both platforms of the station. 20th century, Malvern began to develop into a modern town in the early 1900s, with a continuing strong agricultural presence. Modernization continued, and the World War II years transformed the population and its activities, establishing the town as a center of scientific research. Governance. Malvern as a town and civil parish governed at the lowest tier of local government by Malvern Town Council, part of the Malvern Hills district of the county of Worcestershire. The ward boundaries were redefined from the wards of the former Malvern Urban District Council. Through the many changes in local government infrastructure since the beginning of the 20th century, the importance and distinction by local boundaries of the historical areas of Great Malvern, Malvern Link, North Malvern, Cowley, and other neighbourhoods have been lost. The original parish of Great Malvern included the hamlet of Garlford and the chapelry of Newland, and stretched from the River Severn on the east to the Malvern Hills on the west. Garlford became a separate civil parish in 1894 when, under the Local Government Act of 1894, urban district councils were created for Malvern and Malvern Link. The Garlford parish covered much of eastern Malvern, including parts of Great Malvern, Pickersleigh, Poolbrick, Barnard's Green, Hall Green and Sherrard's Green. By 1900, however, the urban districts of Malvern and Malvern Link amalgamated, absorbing parts of neighbouring parishes to create a town of 6 wards under the Malvern Urban District Council. In 1934 the boundaries changed again, and those areas came under the control of the Malvern Council. Residents of Malvern Town in the 6 Malvern Town Council electoral wards are represented by 20 elected members. The council is supported by a team of senior executives that includes a town clerk, a deputy town clerk, a PA to the town clerk and chairman, an operations and events officer, a finance officer, 2 operations managers, an operations supervisor, and 8 grounds maintenance operatives. The wards are based on the distribution of the population and generally ignore the names of the neighbourhoods and suburbs they contain, and use loaned names. Chase, named after Malvern Chase, covering much of Barnard's Green, the extensive Ministry of Defence property occupied by Kinetic, the campus of the Chase School, the village of Poolbrick, and the largely rural southeastern area of the adjoining Poolbrick and Malvern Commons. Dyson Perrins, the northern part of Malvern adjacent to Link with the campus of Dyson Perrins School and the former Moddera North site, and the former hamlets of Interfield, Halfkey, and Upper Housell. This ward includes a new neighbourhood of the town, Malvern Vale. Link that covers most of the area north of the Link Common between Link Top and Newland, and Upper and Lower Housel. North Malvern, an area between Link Top and West Malvern civil parish that includes the former village of Cowley, Pickesley. That includes the part of the former Great Malvern boundaries east of the railway between Barnard's Green and Malvern Link.Many, the former hamlets of Hall Green and Sherrard's Green, and part of Barnard's Green Priory, covering much of Great Malvern, including all the town centre, and otherwise areas west of the railway between North Malvern and Malvern Wells civil parish. Geography. Town centre. The town centre comprises two main streets at right angles to each other, the steep Church Street and Bellevue Terrace, a relatively flat north-south extension of the A449 which forms Malvern's western extremity along the flank of the hills. In the heart of the town is a statue of the composer Edward Elgar, while other statuary is dedicated to Malvern Water. Among the many shops are two large modern supermarkets, both in Edith Walk, formerly a steep and unmade lane that served the rear entrances of the shops in Church Street. Most of the traditional high street shops, such as butchers, bakers, grocers etc., are now health food shops, art and craft shops, charity shops, law firms, and estate agents. On the Worcester to Hereford railway line is the Victorian Great Malvern Station, a listed example of classical Victorian railway architecture close to the nearby former Imperial Hotel by the same architect, E. W. Elmsley. Suburbs and neighbourhoods. Malvern's rapid urbanisation during the latter half of the 19th century spread eastwards and northwards from Great Malvern, the traditional town centre on the steep flank of the Worcestershire beacon, and engulfed the manors and farms in the immediate area. It was often the farms, such as Pickesley, near Great Malvern, and the Housels in Malvern Link which merged with Great Malvern in 1900 that gave the names to many of the new neighbourhoods. The urban agglomeration continued to spread, and by the middle of the 20th century had reached the suburban parishes of West Malvern, Malvern Wells, Newland, Maidstone, and Garlford. Climate. Malvern lies in the lower Severn Avon plain, affording it a degree of shelter caused by virtue of its nestling in between the Cotswold Hills to the east, the Welsh Hills and Mountains to the west, and Birmingham Plateau to the north. Although, as with all the British Isles, it has a maritime climate, the local topography means summer warmth can become emphasized by a slight fern effect off the surrounding hills. The record maximum stands at 35.8 C set in August 1990. Typically 17.3 days of the year will reach 25.1 C higher, and the annual warmest day should reach 29.8 C according to the 1971-00 observing period. Winter temperature inversions can also occur given the correct conditions, allowing very low minima to occur. Nonetheless, on average the region is one of the warmest non-coastal areas in the UK, with overall nighttime minima in particular rivaling more urban areas. Indeed, despite the notable low absolute minima, the annual average frost ratio is a mere 33 days per year, actually lower than more urbanized weather station locations such as London's Heathrow Airport. A new absolute minimum of -19.5 degrees Celsius was recently set during the record cold month December 2010. Prior to this, the coldest nights were recorded in the winter of 1981-82, -18.1 degrees Celsius in December 1981, -18.0 degrees Celsius in January 1982. The sunniest year was 2003, when 1,776 hours of sunshine were recorded. Rainfall averages around 740 mm per year, with over 1 mm being recorded on 123 days of the year. Snowfall is highly variable. When winter low-pressure systems move from southwest to northeast, the Malvern area is often on the northern flank, meaning heavy snowfall, while areas further south and east receive rain or no precipitation at all. However, when snowfall arrives by means of convective showers driven by northerly, northwesterly and northeasterly winds, the area tends to be one of the least snowy parts of the UK, owing to its sheltered positioning.